Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Welcome to another edition of L'Chaim. I'm Mark Golub. And on this Wednesday night at 9 p.m., we are live in our studios. And as America prepares for the presidential inauguration this coming Monday, January 21st, we thought it'd be interesting to sit with a real audience favorite and longtime friend of L'Chaim, the Libby M. Clapperman Professor of Jewish History at Yeshiva University. And Jeff is one of the leading academicians in his field. Dr. Jeffrey Gurock, let me remind you about some of Jeff's work. For 20 years, Jeff served as the associate editor of the Journal of American Jewish History, the leading academic journal in the field. Twice he was chair of the Academic Council of the American Jewish Historical Society. Jeff is a prolific and superb writer of history for lay readers. He's authored 15 books, including When Harlem Was Jewish, an award-winning history of Mordechai Kaplan's relationship to Orthodox Jewry. Jeff won national recognition for his book, Orthodox Jews in America. As a basketball aficionado and longtime Yeshiva High School basketball coach, Jeff wrote a fun book entitled Judaism's Encounter with American Sports. And just today, the Jewish Book Council announced that Jeff Gurock's book, Jews in Gotham, which is the third in a 3-volume history of New York Jewry, entitled City of Promises, won the 2012 Jewish Book of the Year Award in Jewish History. And Jeff, first congratulations and welcome back to L'Chaim on Shalom TV. It's wonderful to be sitting with you.
Well, thank you very much, but let's get started. I want to correct you about something immediately.
Oh, please.
And that is, the sports book may be interesting to readers, but it's not necessarily a fun book.
It's not a fun book?
No, it's a very serious book. It's a serious book because it talks about how a foreign cultural phenomenon called sports enters into the lives of Jewish immigrants and their children in the 20th century and all the conflicts that ensue in being both Jewish and playing sports. And you know, this book happens to be about sports, but it could be about any sort of performance media. It could be about someone who's interested in the theater or opera and the like. How do you balance your Jewish commitments? How do you balance your secular commitments? And how do you live positively as a Jew in American society? So it's a breed of book quite different from the normal Jews as jocks books, which glorifies...
It's not a Jews as jocks book at all.
It's a serious book of Jewish history, which is perhaps why it hasn't sold as many copies as the more popular works, which glorify, you know, the Sandy Koufaxes and the Hank Greenbergs.
That's not what this is at all.
That's not what this is about.
But I think you're wrong. I think it is a fun book. I think that if you enjoy sports and if you love the Jewish community, reading about how sports was integrated by the traditional Jewish community in America, and then reading of some of the individuals who played sports and were very good.
Right.
And you're a sports fan. I found it fun, and it's in that sense I meant it.
But ultimately, it's a book of Jewish history.
Yes, it is.
And, you know, perhaps one of the most interesting vignettes in the book is the story that I was able to verify of Solomon Schechter, the founder of the 20th century conservative movement in America, head of the Jewish Theological Seminary. During the World Series, he's working with his disciple, Louis Finkelstein, who would succeed him as head of the seminary. And they walk past a kiosk, and Schechter reportedly says to Finkelstein, "Do you know about sports?" The other version is, "Do you play sports?" And Finkelstein, who was not a jock, said, "Not really." And Schechter said, "To be a rabbi in America, you'll never be an effective rabbi in America if you don't know about baseball." And I think the point he was making is entree into people's interests in being Jewish may come from something secular like sports, but through that you can engage people in being involved in religious life. So you were kind enough to mention the book that I wrote with Rabbi Jacob Schachter about Mordechai Kaplan,
Yes.
part of his story is that that the synagogue, the ultimate goal of the synagogue, is for people to enter into the sanctuary, but you can enter through all different portals, whether it's the pool or the gym or the art room or the music room and the like. And I always say those who come to play may stay to pray. Now, whether in fact that crossover drill from playing to praying actually takes place on a large scale is one of the issues that I deal with in the book, because some people feel that if I'm on the basketball team of the Brooklyn Jewish Center and I'm playing, let's say, against some Gentile clubs in Brooklyn, I've done my thing for the Jewish people. It doesn't mean I have to go for Jewish education or for services and the like. That's my commitment to Judaism. So one of the dilemmas for rabbis is that, yes, it's important to bring people in through these things, but that shouldn't be the end game. And I always talk about these things cross-denominationally. It's not an issue for Reform Jews, Conservative Jews, or Orthodox Jews, or rabbis in this case. It's something that's endemic to the American experience. So, yeah, it's a fun book, but life can be serious without being somber. It's a serious book, and I think, I think it still makes for a good bar mitzvah gift.
And you've spoken all over the country about that book.
Yes, I've had a nice run with the book. I've spoken literally all over the world. I gave a paper in Paris last year at a conference dealing with Jews and totalitarian societies and sports, where they looked at the use of sports by Stalinists and by Nazis and by Mussolini. And I was asked to talk about sports and anti-Semitism in the interwar period between 1920 and the Second World War, and how one of the ways you can define Jewish integration in America is whether or not they are admitted to play with other people. I was fortunate as a graduate student to have an African-American professor, the late Nathan I. Huggins, who used to say, for minority groups, wars and sports define community. If you're allowed to play for your team or fight for your country, it's a statement of equality. And to be sure, this week is not only the inauguration of the re-inauguration of the first African-American president, it's also Martin Luther King's birthday. And certainly, you don't need me to tell you that many historians have indicated that to some extent the beginning of the civil rights movement is when Jack Roosevelt Robinson's allowed to play our national game. So again, sports is a very serious topic, not only in terms of the internal life of minority groups, but also how they relate to the outside group. We had in our home, and I'm sorry I lost it, we had an heirloom that my father helped himself to in the 1930s when he wrestled for the 92nd Street Y against the New York Athletic Club. He stole a towel from the New York Athletic Club after they wrestled, because that was as close as a Jew could get to being inside the New York AC. And I spoke about it in Paris. That was one of my things. And you know what? It was the first time in my life where I ever spoke in English, and there was a consecutive translation, like in the United Nations. And you're a great speaker, and I try to speak decently. And I made, I thought, a humorous aside, and there was no laughter because there was a 7 or 8 second delay, and it was somewhat of a challenge.
What was as you look back on it, by the way, what is, from your perspective, your most fun book?
My most fun book is the book that this may be politically correct, but the book that I really wanted to write was this sports book, because I always had the idea of doing this book, but since, frankly, American Jewish history is often not taken all that seriously by other scholars, incorrectly to be sure, it took me a long time to have the guts, the moxie to say, you know what, I'm going to write a book by me, for me, what I really wanted to do. So I really enjoyed doing this book. But this latest book, and you're kind enough to mention that this is, I'm feeling no pain tonight, because it's very exciting to be
that you won the award.
I didn't win it alone, okay? I was part of a team of really 5 or 6 scholars who worked on a 3-volume history of the Jews of New York. Deborah Dashmore was a general editor. Howard Rock did the early volume. Annie Polland and Dan Sawyer did the middle volume. I'm showing I can remember things, which is, a shock for me. I did the contemporary volume from 1920, basically, to 2010, and we had a visual essay done by Diana Linden, which complements the 3 volumes. So
we should say this has all been on. You were part of a session at the Center for Jewish History.
That's correct.
That we have shown on Shalom TV, and we're going to do it again. But you spoke about the 3rd volume,
right.
volume, and Deborah, who was the overall editor, really chaired that session.
Right.
But go ahead.
No, but this latest book, the book I love the most is the book that I've just finished, was a challenge, and the excitement was to write a history about my own beloved city,
New York.
New York, where I've lived my entire life, with the exception of 1 year, and to write about the 20s, 30s, and 40s, which I don't remember, but also to write about my own life. And one of the challenges was to see to what extent was my life idiosyncratic, and as opposed to the larger story of New York Jews. So there's a little bit that's personal in the book, but I'm also writing about the time where I'm growing up in the 50s and 60s, and I take the story up through 9/11, and it was a great challenge, and I think people will enjoy it. I think, whenever I do these types of things, I meet interesting and wonderful people. I've become friends, another sports story, I've become friends with Adolph Dolph Shays, the great basketball player. But I interviewed him not as a basketball player, but as a boy growing up living west of the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. For non-New Yorkers, the Grand Concourse is this large thoroughfare which bisects north to south the Bronx. He lived due west of the Grand Concourse. And he once told me that growing up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, he never went to a synagogue. He was never bar mitzvahed. None of his friends were bar mitzvahed. He knew of a couple of very large synagogues and temples up and down the Grand Concourse, but he never set foot in a synagogue. What was his Jewishness? His Jewishness was living among Jews. He said, my whole world was Jewish. Now, I checked the demographics. Only 6 out of 10 Jews in his neighborhood was Jewish. There were Irish and there were Italians.
Only 6
out of 10.
Of the residents.
Of the residents in his neighborhood. And yet he felt that, where's my Jewishness? The butcher shop, the candy store, the street corner. So one of the things I talk about in the book is this sense of neighborhood, this sense of feeling Jewishness radiating up from the streets, as opposed to having to find your Jewishness, which is a more contemporary story, through formal identification with the synagogue. And if you move to suburbia, you move to exurbia, away from the large cities, you want to find other Jews, you don't bump into them on the stairwells of your apartment. You have to seek out other Jews. So that was one of the things which intrigued me, and I was able to use my interview with him, a few lines. Another person or couple that I was able to profile was a dentist and his wife who lived on the Lower East Side. He lived 100 years and she lived 99 years. And they never left the Lower East Side. And they moved within the so-called Jewish ghetto. And it was never a ghetto because there too, Jews were not the only group in the area. And they moved from cold water tenement to better tenement, to cooperative apartment, to luxury apartments. And they never left the Lower East Side because the dentists, his clients were Jews downtown. The school teacher, his wife was a school teacher, she taught in the public school. Why leave the Lower East Side if I want to live in a Jewish environment? So it was nice to profile average Jews. And that's one of the things that always interested me, to talk not so much about elites, but to talk about the common woman, the common man. And I think that gives texture to our story.
I could talk to Jeff about anything at all. But you ask Jeff a question, and you just love to listen to any story he has. But I'm going to have to bring him now back to the topic at hand, okay? Congratulations on Jews of Gotham, City of Promises, the 3-volume set. You are one of the winners of the Jewish Book Award for 2012. So I said to you, would you come talk to me about presidents as they've related to the Jewish community here in America as we get ready for an inauguration of President Obama for his second term?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I asked you to come here and give me perspective on Obama, no. But we've been here since the middle of the 17th century. And there have been amazing relationships to American presidents over the period of history. And I don't know, as a student of history in general, you would know better than I, but it seems to me that the experience the American Jew has had is unparalleled in the history of the Jewish people. There have been pockets of good times for Jews, but the way in which, especially as we have moved into the 20th and 21st century, the Jew feels at home here rivals any feeling of home the Jew has had anywhere in the diaspora. And in part, Jeff, it begins with this extraordinary letter that George Washington sends to the Jewish community of Rhode Island. And I wanted you just to take a few moments to take a look at some of the critical presidents that have had a relationship of significance to American Jewry over the years. And again, it sets the stage for what we'll experience on Monday, Inauguration Day. And I should also say that in a few moments we're going to put the telephone number up. Any of you who are watching can do one or two things. You can make a comment of your own. I'm happy to hear it. And here you have, obviously, an extraordinary academician dealing with American Jewish history. If you want to ask Jeff a question, anything at all, he'll take your question. But I'm beginning with Washington only because of the letter, and then you'll decide where you want to go from there.
Okay.
But talk for a moment about American Jewry and the White House, the presidency as an institution, and then begin with Washington.
Well, I think that the 1790 letter has to be contextualized and a few things said about it. First of all, the context for the letter was the fact that the first president of the United States goes on what we might call in contemporary times a victory tour or a unifying tour throughout the 13 colonies, now states, as part of bringing the whole country together. You know the old story, George Washington slept here. George Washington slept in all sorts of places. And he was greeted, he was sent letters, he was sent greetings from a variety of civic and religious groups and the like. And the same thing was true of Jews, okay? The Jewish community of Newport, Rhode Island, one of the early settlements of Jews. Moses Seixas, the Seixas family was one of the most prominent Sephardic Jewish families in what becomes the United States. Gershon Mendes Seixas, for example, was the Chazan of Shearit Yisrael, today the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. But Moses Seixas sends a letter to George Washington, and Washington welcoming him to Newport. And in the letter to Washington, he makes the following statement. I have to read it. He writes to Washington about the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Those are the classic lines.
And who wrote them?
Moses Seixas.
Exactly.
Writes it to George Washington.
Exactly.
George Washington cribs it and writes back to the community that you're part of the United States. He uses the words about bigotry and no persecution. Now, by the way, that applies to Anglos. It applies to white folk. It applies to white male land-owning folk. It doesn't apply in terms of total citizenship, in terms of voting rights to women, not into the 20th century, and African Americans for the longest time period, okay? One could argue not until the 1960s were these types of rights totally secured. But probably the most important word in the letter that Washington sends to the community is not bigotry and not persecution, but the word good citizens. Mm-hmm. This is the first time in modern Jewish history, where Jews are literally described as citizens of the nation. So it is a community-defining situation. So very early on, we Jews do very well as far as the federal government is concerned. Just to say one more thing about this early time period, okay? When the 13 colonies become 13 states,
Yes.
Jews do not have complete equality in every state, because although there are acts that were passed by Parliament before the United States came into existence, the question of the highest level of emancipation, what's the highest level of emancipation? The right to vote and the right to rule over Gentiles, which is called to hold public office, was denied to Jews and other dissenters from whatever dominant faith obtained in a particular colony. For example, Maryland, which was a Catholic colony, was particularly strict in terms of its trying to maintain the homogeneity of the colony. In New England, the Puritans likewise wanted a homogeneous colony. So the colonies and then the states, when America came into existence, there was no guarantee that Jews, with the exception of New York and a few other places, would have full rights, okay? What Washington is saying here is that on the federal level, Jews are Jews so long as they're male, white, and landowners, okay? It's going to take a while for these things to come into play and to ameliorate that situation, are being defined as citizens. So we get off on the right track, certainly with George Washington, and I think every year the Newport Synagogue, which is still in existence, has a reading of that letter, and that's one of the more iconic documents in American Jewish history.
You consider it a legitimate landmark moment in American Jewish life?
Oh, I think in modern Jewish life, the definition of Jews by the first president of the United States as citizens of the United States is an extraordinarily important moment. Now, even after that moment, there are going to be problems on the state level in ensuring total voting rights. But I should also point out that in most instances in the United States, where Jews have problems in terms of securing the full bounties of emancipation, they're not alone. In fact, Jews are a lowercase version of a minority group at that point. The numbers of Jews in the United States are very limited. When Jews are seen, they're seen in a very positive way by most Americans. They're loyal, they're patriotic, they're economically viable. Okay, so it's an important early moment in terms of American Jewish history. So, Mark, as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about Mount Rushmore. Okay, so you think of the four fellas on Mount Rushmore. Let me just run through. Let me run through.
Excellent.
Okay, so let me leave Thomas Jefferson out. Okay, let me jump to Abraham Lincoln. Okay, I hope he's on Mount Rushmore. Okay, Abraham Lincoln is important in securing again this critical emancipation. There are two very important incidents that apply to Jews.
Because we normally don't think of Lincoln and Jews.
That's correct. That's correct. You know, the recent movie on Lincoln, one of the things that I took away from the movie that applies to what I'm going to say is how easy it was in the 19th century to get an audience with the President of the United States. I think it dates back to Andrew Jackson when he is inaugurated. You won't have this with Obama, and you wouldn't have it in the 20th century, certainly after Jack Kennedy was assassinated. You know, Inauguration Day open house, everybody comes in, shaking hands for hours with the common folk. So Lincoln, access to Lincoln is pretty much available. So there are two incidents that are very important in terms of American Jewish history. They are minor stories in the American narrative, but very important to us. And the first one takes place in 1861, where there's a controversy over the right of Jews to have chaplains, Jewish chaplains, serving in the Union Army. Now, prior to the Mexican War, all chaplains were Protestants. We're fighting against the Mexicans who are Catholic. Very quickly, Catholic priests are added in. Okay? 1861, a regiment that's led by regiment in Pennsylvania, I believe, that's led by a Jewish captain or colonel, whatever it was, designates a Jew to be chaplain. And there's opposition from the War Department. I think the YMCA, which at that point was more than just an athletic organization, but a very Christian organization, objects to a chaplain. Now, a Jewish chaplain not only serves Jewish soldiers, but all people, being a chaplain for the regiment. At that point, a Jewish reverend, not a rabbi, named Arnold Fischel, actually goes to the White House. He gets an audience with Lincoln, and Lincoln countermands that order. So remember, wars in sports are community-defining situations?
Yes.
Okay, so now a wartime situation, the American community is being defined originally with Jews not part of the mix. Jews can't be chaplains. So from that point on, Jews have equality in terms of the chaplaincy, even though the number of Jewish soldiers in the Civil War, in all American wars, are minimal because we're a small part of the population. And I've often said to my students that whether Jews supported either side of the war or supported the revolution had no impact upon who's going to win the war.
Yes.
But it's a community-defining situation, very significant.
We're going to have to pause in one moment, but
Sure.
you said there were two
Right.
Lincoln stories.
Right.
Give me the second one.
Second story, very quickly but very important. 1862, a very frustrated Union general named Ulysses S. Grant puts out an edict expelling Jews as a class of people from Union-occupied territories in the South, accusing the Jews of being carpetbaggers and scalawags against the population down there. Now, were Jews involved in carpetbagging? The answer is yes. Were Christians involved? The answer is yes. Were the Jews as a class, as a group, doing this? The answer is no, but this was a re-evocation of the Middle Ages where Jews, now you said America is a place where Jews had unparalleled freedom. Jews are going to be expelled from this area. Again, a situation obtains where anti-Semitism is being promoted here. A local Jewish citizen of Kentucky, Cesar Kaskel, travels to Washington, D.C., somehow gets an audience with the President of the United States. Again, I'm thinking of that movie where the door is open, okay? The support of Jewish newspapers in the land, etc. And he's able to get Lincoln to, again, countermand this particular edict against Jews. It's a very significant moment. We know from the newspapers of the time. In fact, one of my colleagues, Howard Rock, who did the first volume, 1654 to 1860, points out that New York Jews were quite aware of this story, even though it wasn't affecting them. So again, it's an emancipation story. Mark, the first level of emancipation for Jews is when you're allowed to be there. And then over the course of time, you get all these other types of rights. So Lincoln comes up very big for the Jewish community. Most American historians don't deal with it. It's a minor story within the Civil War story, but it's very important for us.
Fabulous. So we did very well with both Washington and Lincoln.
Right.
Thank you so much. We're going to pause for just 2 minutes. When we come back, we're going to open the phones. So let's just put the phone number up for one moment. Let me see the phone number. If you want to participate, you want to talk to Jeff Gurock, I don't care if you have a question or a comment, 201-242-1142. We'll continue with Jeff Gurock, Professor of American Jewish History at Yeshiva University. Stay with us.
One boy's struggle between tradition and art. Chaim Potak's My Name is Asher Lev tells the powerful story of a boy prodigy who must be an artist at any cost. A triumph, one of the best new plays of the year, says the Huffington Post. 4 stars critics pick from Time Out New York. And New York Magazine says, you should see it, your children should see it, everyone should see it. My Name is Asher Lev, now through May 26th at the West Side Theater. Get your tickets now.
Who looks better, bald Milo or Milo with hair? What about this guy? Bald Torrance or Torrance with hair? If you think that you'd look and feel better with hair, now you can do something about it. Introducing the world's first and only permanent solution to hair loss. You wash it, you cut it. It's your own real, naturally growing hair. When it comes to hair restoration, no one in the world has more experience than Bosley. The results look completely natural and are affordable on nearly any budget. To find out more about this clinically proven and permanent solution to hair loss, call now to receive your free no-obligation information kit. It'll answer all of your questions about hair loss and hair restoration. Plus, we'll also send you this $250 gift certificate just for calling. Every day you wait, you're losing more hair. So what are you waiting for? Choose hair. Choose Bosley.
Call 1-800-687-1732. That's 1-800-687-1732.
Shalom TV, television worth watching for the entire family. With the best in entertainment, culture, movies, Jewish studies, children's programs, news, events, and interviews. Shalom TV, television really worth watching.
The New York Times declares Broadway's must-see event has arrived. Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? A superlative production. Tracy Letts is electrifying. USA Today says it's ferociously entertaining. Amy Morton is superb. The Associated Press calls it an astonishing masterpiece. And Bloomberg News reports this brilliant production grabs you and never lets go. Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Visit telecharge.com.
On L'chaim, we're talking with Dr. Jeffrey Gurock, professor of Jewish history at Yeshiva University, and we'd love to invite you to add your own voice in this second half of the program. I'm going to ask Jeff to talk about both Roosevelts in a moment, but we're going to put the phone number up, and don't call me. There's the number. So you call me if you'd like to speak with Jeff. Okay, both Roosevelts, Teddy and FDR, how did we do with them?
Well, the first two presidents I mentioned were very favorably disposed towards Jews. The third president, Teddy Roosevelt, likewise was very disposed towards Jews. Teddy Roosevelt gets involved with the Jewish community on the Lower East Side when he is one of the first police commissioners of the city of New York. And there are two things that he does that affect Jews. One is that in 1896, there is a tremendously hot summer on the Lower East Side, and people are literally dying in the streets. He prevails upon the fire department, the fire brigade, to wash down the streets of the Lower East Side, water cannons to clean up the air pollution in those days was not from cars, it was from animals and the like. So that gave him a certain cachet with the Jewish community. The other thing he did, which is somewhat humorous but speaks to his friendship with Jews, is that same year of 1896, an anti-Semitic preacher from Germany named Reverend Alvart comes to New York to preach against Jews, to preach anti-Semitism. And Alvart was very concerned about being attacked by Jews. After all, it's becoming, it already was the largest Jewish community in the world, so he demands police protection. And in Roosevelt's autobiography, he tells us that he accommodated Alvart by providing him with a completely Jewish group of policemen. If you think about it, 1896, he probably used all the Jewish policemen that there were in the city of New York to protect this. And the other thing about Teddy Roosevelt is that he's the first president of the United States to appoint, with the confirmation of the Congress, a Jew to a cabinet post.
Who's that?
Oscar S. Strauss. Oscar Strauss.
Amazing.
Oscar Strauss.
We're going to interrupt you for 1 second because I want to bring Laura in. Laura is calling from Brooklyn. Laura, what is your question or comment? And I'm sorry, Serge, we can't hear her. Laura, what is your question or comment?
Yes, okay. I want him to talk.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can, dear.
Yes, we can. Sure.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I want to talk to you about the Jonas Brothers, the famous brothers. Yes.
By the way, let me just
The
say one thing.
famous-
You must turn your volume down if you're going to be on the
From
air.
the Confederate Army.
The Jonas Brothers and the Confederate Army. You want to say anything about them?
I'm frankly.
Okay, I will.
This
will.
rarely happens in my class, but I'm stumped. Tell me more about the Jonas Brothers. This is something.
And I'm going to say something also, Laura.
Okay,
I appreciate this. My problem is, I was hoping that any caller would stay on point here, having to do with the relationship between the Jewish community and the presidents. I promise, but this is your first of many visits here.
Right.
There should be a time when you come sit at this table, and we'll just let people ask you questions about anything having to do with American Jewish history. And between now and then, you'll find out about the Jonas Brothers.
But you know what? Since I can't answer the specific question, I'll answer it in general terms, okay? And that is, Jews are loyal both north and south of the Mason-Dixon line during the Civil War. Judah P. Benjamin. We talked about Oscar Strauss being the first Jewish cabinet member. You know, and by the way, as we speak today, right, a Jew is about. If he's confirmed by the Senate, Jacob Jack Lew is going to be confirmed as Secretary of Treasury of the United States. So there's a continuity here as far as that's concerned. But Judah P. Benjamin is Secretary of the State of the Confederacy, and Jews are very loyal on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line.
Southern Jews are loyal to the Confederacy.
Are good Southerners, and they remain that way for the longest time.
We have a caller from Riverdale.
Okay.
What's the name, Surge in my ear? Bame from Riverdale. Welcome.
Yes. Jeff?
Yes?
Jeff, can you hear me?
I'm here.
Yes. It's nice to see you sitting down in one place. I normally see you early morning hours jogging past my house.
Guilty.
Yes, okay. So I just wanted to tell you a short vignette. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was in the Fort Lauderdale airport, and I saw this very handsome, tall man, completely gray-haired. I walked over to him. I said, "Are you Dolph Shays?" He gave me a big smile. We talked for a while, and he was very pleasant. I was with my grandson. I introduced my grandson. My grandson's name is Devere. He said, "Well, what kind of name is that?" I said, "It's a Hebrew name." He says, "What does it denote?" I said, "It denotes the inner sanctum of the ancient temple in Israel." So he gave me a big smile. He said, "He's tall. Does he play basketball?" I said, "Well, he's pretty good at basketball, but right now he's concentrating on his studies." So it was very interesting. He was very charming. And I just wanted to let you know that he hasn't lost any of his charm over the years. And it's great to talk to you. Good luck to you with your new book.
Thank you. So I could talk for a half an hour about Dolph Shays. He's really... before someone named Wilton Chamberlain was the all-time leading scorer in the NBA, Dolph Shays had that record. He is modest, he is humble, he's a very sincere person, and he's become quite a committed Jew, by the way.
Interesting.
Later on in his life. And
that's not where he started out.
That's not where he started out. And I spoke at the congregation where he's involved in Syracuse. And when I walked in, I walked over to him and I introduced myself and I sang a few bars of the DeWitt Clinton fight song because my dad had gone to DeWitt Clinton, and obviously so did Dolph Shays. And the day before I went up to Syracuse, I was sitting in the synagogue on Shabbat, and a young Jew says to me, "Jeff, what are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "I'm going up to Syracuse, and I'm told Dolph Shays will be there." And this fellow said, "Oh, is he Danny Shays' father?" So when I was introduced, I acknowledged Dolph's presence, and I said, "Dolph, I just want you to know how you're being remembered. You're being remembered as Danny Shays' father. And as a father and as a grandfather, I think that's pretty darn good." And
it is wonderful.
Yeah,
That's a wonderful story.
He's quite a nice person.
Oh, wait, going nowhere at all, just
Yes.
Free associating. You know, this past year, we lost a great basketball star in college who played for Duke and then played for
the Knicks.
For the Knicks, had one good year. And
Right.
that was, I forget, it was
Art Heyman.
Heyman.
Art Heyman.
Did you ever meet him?
No, I didn't know. We can do an hour on sports, but Art Heyman and Larry Brown played out on Long Island in the early 60s. It was a time where Barry Kramer was playing for NYU. It was like the last era of the great Jewish basketball players. One of the people who's featured on your show a lot is Alan Dershowitz.
Yes.
We did a gig together at the Center for Jewish
show
History.
on Shalom TV.
It was so much fun. Two guys talking sports and going back and forth. But
all right, well, I have to interrupt you again.
Sure.
We're going down to Princeton, New Jersey. Sid, welcome. What's your comment or question?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I wanted to know why the professor felt that the Jews weren't as successful getting to Roosevelt as they were to Lincoln and other presidents, especially about refugees and the problem with the Jews there.
Okay, we come back to our topic at hand. You said one Roosevelt, we had a better relationship with, by the way, the American Jewish community has had this reverence for FDR, which has eroded as more and more came out in post-Holocaust studies. But answer Sid's question.
So I think that's what the gentleman is asking about.
Yes.
Okay, so in my opinion, not only is there a Teddy Roosevelt, but there are two Franklin Roosevelts. Okay, there's a Franklin Roosevelt of the 1930s who brings into the federal government significant number of Jews into government, which, by the way, raises the hackles of anti-Semites who see Roosevelt as being the lackey of Jews. But more importantly, the ideas of Social Security, workman's compensation, unemployment insurance, you'll excuse the expression, the welfare state, which was first talked about by labor unions and socialist groups, with Jews playing a very important component therein within New York State. Remember, Roosevelt is governor of the state of New York. Okay, Jews moving into the Democratic Party is something that Jews revered Roosevelt in the 1930s because he legitimizes some of these aspirations that were held by Jews and others of the progressive.
Although these are not specifically Jewish issues, they are American issues of which Jews feel passionate.
These are working class issues of poor. Jews, predominantly working class and poor, wanted these things. They had a hearing of this when first with Al Smith and then with Roosevelt in New York, and then this is the Roosevelt of the 1930s, has this enormous cachet with the Jews. And then there's the Roosevelt of the 1940s. So problematic in terms of what he did or did not do, what his government did not do in terms of the refugee crisis, about which that so many people have written an enormous amount. I will tell you, Mark, you mentioned that for 20 years I serve as associate editor of American Jewish History. We received more submissions about Roosevelt and the Jews and the dilemmas and the problems of rescue and refugeeism of that point than any other type of thing. So let me just give a different type of slant on this based upon my new book, Jews in Gotham. So each one of us who did our volumes had important wars to deal with. Howard Rock dealt with the Civil War. Annie Polland and Dan Sawyer dealt with World War I. I have a chapter about World War II, and my question is, what are the average Jew, what average Jews, I've been lecturing about this all over the country, what the average Jew doing, knowing, thinking during World War II? And one of the things that's quite clear is that the love affair with Roosevelt radiates up from the street, this uncritical acceptance of the boss in Washington, D.C. Due to the help of one of my students, I was able to find out about the Sephardic community in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn during World War II. And I happened upon a document that was produced by the women of that community. It was called the Victory Journal. This was a newspaper, a magazine, which was produced in Bensonhurst and sent to people, to GIs, Sephardic American GIs overseas. And you see the editorials during the Shoah saying that we have to support the American government. Thank God Franklin Roosevelt is in the White House. There is criticism of other people. There's certainly criticism of the Red Cross. But Roosevelt is this icon. Mm-hmm. And now we know much more, okay? And at the risk of not saying enough about a very difficult story, I have to say that Roosevelt, at least minimally, is caught up in the war effort, the overriding war effort. The State Department certainly doesn't give him all the information. And perhaps most critically, we can say that Roosevelt, at the end of the day, I do not believe is an anti-Semite, but is a politician. And the Jews are seen as a group that is extraordinarily supportive of Roosevelt. As I tell you this, what I'm hearing in the back of my mind is, Gurock, you're not giving enough of the texture of the story. Mm-hmm. But certainly it's a different Roosevelt than the Roosevelt of 1930s.
What do you mean there's not a texture?
In other words, you have to talk about all the different issues year by year that's going on during World War II. For example, the question of bombing the camps.
Which he decided not to do.
Right. There's a window of opportunity that could have been taken by the American government. But it's not from 1939 to 1945. It's only in 1944 where we get close enough in terms of invading Europe to fly the planes, if they could, to Europe and to Eastern Europe and back, etc. So the scholar in me says, you're doing a popular show. You're not giving enough nuance here. But what I do want to say is that the image of the Roosevelt of the 1930s carries over into Jewish perceptions of him on the street in the 1940s, and that is extraordinarily important in understanding the reaction of the average Jew. Okay, and then the question that people are constantly asking about: what did the average Jew know? What's in the newspapers? And that gets into the question of what we see in the newspapers, the question of cognition, the question of recognition of exactly what's going on here. So there are, in fact, two Franklin Roosevelts. One who is certainly a great friend of the Jews, and the Franklin Roosevelt, the politician of the 1940s, who's minimally very, very problematic.
You know, the other criticism of Roosevelt is that he would do nothing to open the doors to Jewish refugees. Even when the St. Louis had this tremendous problem, couldn't get into Cuba, couldn't get into Miami. Eleanor Roosevelt intercedes, she can't win. And those are the two areas of criticism. Why would he not bomb the railway leading into Auschwitz? And why wouldn't he have done more to open the door? There's always a tendency to use contemporary prisms to look back at times that were very different. As a historian, how do you view Roosevelt's relationship to the Jewish community in World War II in its entirety? What's your sense of him?
Again, there are different pieces.
Yes,
to
but if you put all the pieces together,
but they're different.
What's the sum?
Ultimately, Roosevelt deals with Jews as a political entity that he doesn't necessarily have to be responsive to. I don't think it is a function of an innate anti-Semitism, but his political agenda and the exigencies of the war. So let me give you one example along those lines. So in the 1930s, the late 1930s, there are all sorts of bills that are put into Congress to abridge or eliminate the immigration laws, an issue that we continue to deal with in contemporary times. Public opinion polls, which become very popular in the United States late 1930s, indicate that the vast majority of Americans, don't want to see the laws made easier. And in fact, there's a significant amount of feeling that says we should make it even stricter to get immigrants into the United States. So the Congress of the United States, which is also worthy or unworthy of criticism, their attitude is most of their constituents do not want the gates of America open. So then the question is, both for Roosevelt and for the Jewish group, Jewish leadership, do you push on a door that is completely closed? One of the good friends of the Jew, a New Yorker, of German and Irish extraction, primarily German extraction, is Robert F. Wagner Sr. His son, Robert F. Wagner, was the mayor in the 1950s into 1960s. His grandson, Bobby Wagner, was the head of the Board of Education. Just as a geographical trivia question, if you go up the FDR Drive, the East Side Drive on Manhattan, there's the Bobby Wagner walkway. Anyway, Wagner and a woman named Rogers from Maine introduced a bill to admit 10,000 Jewish children beyond the quotas. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of, and with restrictions, they couldn't work, they couldn't take the jobs of Americans. Quakers step up and say they'll adopt them temporarily, etc. And the vast majority of Americans are opposed to it. So the atmospherics there are such where Jews during the Depression, fear of Jews taking American jobs, canards against Jews as being radicals, socialists, communists, and the like, and there's a Jewish component therein as well. All those things work against the Jews. So do I think that Roosevelt was a friend of the Jews in the 40s? The answer, I don't see him as a friend. Do I see him as an avowed ideological enemy? The answer is no. Maybe one of the messages of this story is that Jews find themselves in one political party as opposed to both political parties. But the other political party, the Republican Party, is far more isolationist than the Democratic Party. So we find ourselves, and you're right, the important thing to do as a historian or as a Jew is to see it within the context context of its time. Of its time.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about two men, and only because we're running out of time, I want to just stretch this out. I'm going to ask you to be very, very brief. Roosevelt is succeeded by Truman. Truman's there when the State of Israel is declared. Truman gets a lot of credit. America is the first country to recognize Israel. There's some sense that in the State Department there's opposition to his recognizing Israel as a state. Give me 1 minute on Harry Truman and the Jews.
Well, Harry Truman, in the years after the Shoah, I think is sensitized to the destruction of European Jewry. There is an intercession on behalf of the Zionist cause by a former partner of his in Missouri, Eddie Jacobson.
Right.
But I think from a moral and ethical point of view, and he's up against all sorts of State Department antagonism towards Zionism, and very courageously supports the State of Israel from its inception. And from that point on, we've never had a president who's been opposed to Zionism.
Never have.
Never had. We've had difficulties. We had difficulty
more or less.
We've had difficulties in 1956 with Eisenhower and John Foster Dulles. There have been other blips on the screen, but fortunately, we've never had to deal with a situation where anti-Zionism is strong within the United States. And I wonder how Jews would deal with that if that, in fact, were the case.
Okay. I want to go back to the phones for one moment. We're going to the Bronx and welcoming Abrams. Abrams, welcome. Abrams, are you there?
Yeah.
Please, a question or a comment.
My question is a simple one. The Imperial Japanese government in World War II, I think they did not collaborate very well with Nazi Germany on trying to take the Jews out of conquered areas that they held. The Japanese government also saved a lot of Jews in Eastern Europe. Am I correct on that?
One of the ways that Jews of Poland and Russia saved themselves was to exit eastward. And there was a considerable refugee community in Shanghai, which coalesced with the indigenous Jewish community in China, which was controlled by the Japanese at that point. Yes, the Japanese opened their gates, so to speak, for those Jewish refugees. Yes, that's true. Now, there's another piece to the story as far as World War II is concerned, and that is, one of the general editor of our series, Deborah Day-Ashmore, did a wonderful book a few years ago called GI Jews, about the experience of Jewish GIs. So what I wanted to do in my book was talk about the mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and wives and children were left behind. But she makes the point that, when you go into the service, you can't choose which theater of operation they assigned you to, right? But Jews wanted to fight against the Germans. Most Americans wanted to fight against the Japanese.
Yes.
So you have that sort of difference at that time period.
Only because we are running out of time, I'm going to skip. The one thing I don't want to talk to you about is, has Obama been good or bad for Israel? Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you if you can comment on the extent to which this president, who we're about to inaugurate on Monday for a second term, has had around him a cadre of Jews, not only Jews, Jeffrey, but observant Jews. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we are now seeing that the next Secretary of the Treasury may be the former White House Chief of Staff, Mr. Liu.
Right.
And can you make any comment at all, again, not about Obama and Israel, but Obama, the fact that this administration has had in it observant Jews, which I don't remember happening in the same way?
So I think the observance piece, whether it's Jack Lew, or let's go back to, we almost had an Orthodox Jewish vice president of the United States, right?
Joe Lieberman.
Joe Lieberman of Connecticut. Okay, I think that their Jewishness, in terms of the American public mind, is a curiosity. I think most Americans like the fact that Lew and Joseph Lieberman are observant religious people. And I think that the fact that their Jewishness is hardly mentioned, except as a postscript. And by the way, Jack Lew is an Orthodox Jew, okay, who has a terrible handwriting. That's the story on the street. Says a lot about levels of acceptance. It's not the Jew Jack Lew who's become the Secretary of Treasury. It's Jack Lew who is an observant Jew. It's where the modifier comes in. Says a lot about how well we're doing in this country. Quite different from when Oscar Strauss ascends to the Secretary of Commerce and Industry, was called in the 1890s. By the way, Oscar Strauss is also one of the founding fathers of the American Jewish Historical Society.
Lovely.
And, so it comes full circle.
We have to stop only because we're out of time. We have to just continue this one other night. I want you to come on a Wednesday night when we open the phones. I love the fact that so many of you called. Thank you for the calls. Even if they were not exactly on theme, it makes me think that we should have an evening when you can ask Jeff any question about American Jewish history. Congratulations again on the book, and thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you very much.
Love you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. That's L'chaim for tonight. My thanks to Jeff Gurock. I hope you enjoyed hearing him as much as I always enjoy hearing him. I invite you to be in touch with us with any thoughts or comments you may have always. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I always look forward to hearing from you. My thanks also tonight to our director, Sloan Copeland, program coordinator, Serge Goldberg, camera, Oleg Oswalenko, master control, Dave Schumann. Thank you all. And again, a special thanks to our callers. And a very special thanks to all of you for being part of this L'chaim community here on Shalom TV. And a most special thanks to those of you who've taken the time to write me with such kind and supportive things to say about this new Shalom TV channel. You have no idea how wonderful it is for me to read your comments. And I hope those of you who are now watching, tell your family and friends about the programming we have here on Shalom TV. And if any of your family or friends don't have the channel on their cable or satellite television system, tell them to call their systems and say they want their Shalom TV channel. Anyway, thank you, Jeff,
Thank you very much.
Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.